This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
Most of the time, the average caregiver is putting in the equivalent of a part-time job a week, whether you're caregiving for somebody directly in your home or you're caregiving for them in an assisted living community. There is still a caregiving role. We know that the people who get better care are the ones who are their families are actively involved in their care.
This is the Heart of Hospice podcast with Helen Bauer. Elizabeth Miller of the Happy Healthy Caregiver podcast is my guest today to talk about her caregiving experience and how her advocacy and support for caregivers is making a difference. Whether you're a family caregiver or an end-of-life professional, the Heart of Hospice is here to enhance your hospice experience by connecting you with information you can use about end-of-life care.
This episode is sponsored by Hospice Navigation Services. When end-of-life care becomes confusing or overwhelming, Hospice Navigation Services can help. With hospice navigators on your side, you have hospice professionals who are trained to provide accurate, unbiased information. Hospice Navigation Services, the guide for your journey. Now here's today's episode.
Happy Healthy Caregiver. I just love the name. It almost beams out sunshine, and I'm not much of a Pollyanna type person, but it appeals to me. My guest today is the host of the Happy Healthy Caregiver podcast. Her name is Elizabeth Miller. She is a certified caregiving consultant, and she's the owner of the Happy Healthy Caregiver. The site, the podcast, and the community was created by Elizabeth because she was craving a supportive community just like this when her caregiver responsibilities took on a whole new level after her dad died in 2014, and she and her siblings had no choice but to move their mom out of state to a safe caregiving situation. Elizabeth was stressed, overwhelmed. She said she often felt suffocated by the never-ending to-do lists that she was up against. She describes herself as a sandwich caregiver, which means she was caring for young kids, her children, at the same time she was helping to care for her mom. Elizabeth says she's one of several kids, and they basically work to create a caregiving village, each one of them finding some place in the village where they could contribute based on where they were and who they were. And when her mom's needs outgrew the system where Elizabeth lives, they moved her out of state to one of Elizabeth's sister's homes. And Elizabeth became a remote caregiver, or what she calls a support caregiver for her sister, who became the primary caregiver. She's had good hospice experiences, which always makes me so happy. Gives me so much joy to hear people say that they had a good hospice experience. And Elizabeth's experience really has been a lifelong one. She describes herself as a lifelong caregiver, which is unusual, but she has a brother who has developmental needs, so she and her siblings have sort of been a caregiving village for him her entire life. So one of the things that I was really struck with, and I hope that it resounds with you, Elizabeth talks on the interview about the advice that we always tell caregivers to put your oxygen mask on first before you take care of the person that you're responsible for. She doesn't agree with that. She doesn't really like that one. And when you think about her explanation, it makes complete sense. She says that is an action that takes place when there's an emergency. Those oxygen masks don't fall down in the airplane until something happens, something frightening happens, and that response system is triggered. So everybody's in a panic. Oh, there's an emergency. She believes in being proactive, taking care of self first so that you can take care of others, but not in an emergent way. The way she describes it, her analogy is a nest of birds. The mom goes out, feeds herself, digs for the worms, and comes back to take care of the baby birds that are in the nest, each one squawking with mouth open, this is my need, this is what I need, can you do this for me? But the mom goes out and takes care of herself first before she comes back to those who need the care. I think that's a great analogy, and she's talking about self-care, proactive self-care as a caregiver, and how important that is. So you're really going to get a lot out of my interview with Elizabeth, whether you're a professional caregiver as an end-of-life worker, or whether you're a personal caregiver for someone you love. So here's my conversation with Elizabeth Miller. Elizabeth Miller, I'm so glad to get to talk to you. It's great to see your smiling face. Welcome.
Thank you, Helen. Glad to be here.
It's good to reconnect with you. It's been a while. It's been a minute.
It's been a minute. We're still here.
Yeah, we are still here. Maybe that's the key to it these days. I read in the news this week that, they're going to officially end the public health emergency. So for healthcare people, that's a huge deal, right? The PHE is going to stop and the regulations will revert back to what we were doing before. So maybe it's just time for everybody to take a deep breath. Oh, and remember who we are and where we are, and hopefully that we've learned a few things.
Yes. There have been some good insights for sure.
I would hope so. Hopefully we've gained some wisdom and some resiliency from everything that's happened over the last 3 years.
Without a doubt.
So we're going to jump into it. I've already told my listeners, you are the host of the Happy Healthy Caregiver podcast, and you have a big caregiving journey and a lot of caregiving wisdom that you have acquired along the way. So how did your caregiving journey start, and what did that look like for you?
Well, like most caregivers, I think I was kind of voluntold, or just happened to be, wasn't something I elected for sure. But my parents have had chronic comorbidities my entire adult life. And I'm 51 years young. So they're no longer with us. And at the same time, my husband was also caring for his mom who had lung cancer. So we've been exposed to caregiving as a mudslide, frankly. Like, it wasn't like one event that happened. It was just, you could see it happening. And there was some mini interventions even that were going on that really were out of our control. We're dealing with adults here who get to pick and choose what they want to do. I've also been exposed to caregiving my entire life. I've got an older brother who has a developmental and intellectual disability, and just was like part of what we did. He was just a little bit different, and we did things differently. And he had his own things that we had to accommodate. So I've witnessed it in many, many ways. I'm from a very large family. Seems like there's always somebody that needs care. But like many people, I didn't call myself a family caregiver at first. In fact, I didn't even name my business anything about caregiving at first. It wasn't just something I didn't self-identify.
I think a lot of caregivers can relate to that. I think you sort of wake up, like you're saying, what did you call it? Voluntold? Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden you realize half of my time is spent as a caregiver. I'm a caregiver. And yet it's accumulated piece by piece by piece, little tasks, little chores at a time, responsibilities. And then all of a sudden, boom, this is your life.
Yeah, it was a spiral for us in 2014. My husband and I were, kids were in middle school. We were working full time. We were in the peak of our career. And all of a sudden, we were both caring for our moms at the same time. My dad had a very quick spiral and spent his last week on hospice in the summer of 2014. And then later that year, we lost Jason's mom, my husband's mom, again, she was also, on hospice for a bit. So, and then mom became, came to Atlanta, which is where I live. And I've got 2 brothers here and me. I've got one brother that's, really good when you tell him exactly what you need him to help with. And the other one is probably just makes things worse in some ways, and is definitely consistent about it wasn't something he was interested in helping with.
Right. Not every sibling engages. So you are a sandwich caregiver when you guys got started.
Yes. Squeeze in the sandwich generation. In fact, that's the term that I first identified with as I started Googling, and I'm like, what in the world? Like, how do people cope with this? In sandwich generation, squeezed in that sandwich. And then I was like, where's the meat? Where's me? M-E-A and meat, capital M-E-A-T, in the sandwich, because I just felt like I was disappearing, frankly. So that was initially sandwich caregiver, generation caregiver. And now I would say I'm a sibling caregiver. We share the care for my brother, and he's a snowbird. So he lives half the year in Michigan with my sister and half the year down here with my one brother. And then I become kind of his support person, that we do a lot of social stuff together, social self-care, I'll say.
That's awesome. So if you had to categorize, I guess, or classify your caregiving style, what type of caregiver are you?
I'm the tough love caregiver, for sure. Yeah. My mom and we had a great relationship. She used to say I made her laugh, and we had a lot of fun. We have a lot of similarities. We both loved to read and write and had a lot of things in common. I also looked the most like her, like in a scary way. Like old pictures of my mom could be me, which is crazy. So, but we would butt heads, and I would push her, to really step it up, and, meet me halfway was one of the phrases I would tell her all the time. Like, Mom, you've got to meet me halfway. Whereas I would say my older sister, who we eventually turned the reins over of me being the primary caregiver of Mom when she lived nearby in assisted living communities for about 16 months, to my sister. My older sister got a divorce. She wanted to take Mom full time. Much more of a nurturing caregiver, my older sister. So I would say I'm a better caregiver cheerleader than I am a caregiver. And I think there's a role for both things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's kind of like the love languages. Everybody has their own, or a combination of some of them. I think caregiving styles are the same way.
Yeah.
When y'all moved your mom and you relinquished that primary caregiver role, what impact did that have on you psychologically and emotionally? How did you feel about relinquishing that tough love relationship in that primary role?
Well, I feel like, it was going to morph into something else. I wasn't going to kind of leave my sister stranded, for sure. When we transitioned care from me to her, I became a long distance support caregiver for my sister. And, we got into our groove of me going in and providing her respite every quarter. At first it would be kind of very reactive for her. And it's like, oh my gosh, I need a break. And I thought, well, I'm working, I've got kids, I need a little more planning. So then we started doing a better job of that. But at first, there was some relief. I'm not going to lie. Most of the time, the average caregiver is putting in the equivalent of a part-time job a week, whether you're caregiving for somebody directly in your home or you're caregiving for them in an assisted living community. There is still a caregiving role. We know that the people who get better care are the ones who are their families are actively involved in their care. And there's the doctor's appointments and all of that. So I was grateful in some ways that my sister wanted my mom full time. I thought she was crazy, frankly. But she knew, I had a nervous breakdown, not a nervous breakdown, but definitely a panic attack on one of our sister's weekends, where my sisters could see she's losing it. We've got to step in here. So, and assisted living was not a fit for my mom. She's definitely a rebel, and likes things. She liked things a certain way. Sometimes flip between the past and the present tense, but she passed in 2020. So having a nurturing caregiver who's going to like be that on-demand caregiver was a great fit for my mom. Whereas, I had to kind of squeeze her into my work days and figure out how it was going to work for my family.
For a lot of people like that need a caregiver, there's a loss of control when you have to let someone else's schedule or their other responsibilities like a full-time job and kids and a household and a husband take priority over the things that you need. My own mom struggles with some of that. At her age, she also can't relate to the fact that I have a job or my sister isn't available by phone all the time because she's working and she doesn't have her phone audible where she can hear it. And my mom can't relate to those things anymore. She's been out of that part of life, working life, for a long time, raising kids, that sort of thing. And she's forgotten. So there's a loss of control, I think, that comes with that some carries find frustrating.
Yeah, I think that's, the hindsight that I now have that I didn't necessarily have in the day-to-day of caring for mom, is like that was where the friction would happen. I love the term care partnership, actually, or care partners, because I do feel like it's a partnership and there's a lot of conversations that need to happen about, the dynamics of how things need to work. But I remember the same, like my mom would be, she didn't love to like get up and get moving in the morning. And I needed to take her to the doctor's appointments, like the first one in the morning. So it didn't like landslide throughout the entire day. And she would tell me, why do we have to do this so early? You move too fast for me, Elizabeth. Like, oh my gosh. And I would have to help her understand, like, Mom, it's already a half day off work for me to come and take you to the doctor's office. Like, I've got to figure out how to minimize this so that I can use that other half day off work another time instead of it taking, a full day of work.
Absolutely.
I can totally relate. My mom was never in the corporate world. She was a registered nurse, which maybe made her even like a harder care recipient.
Oh, I think that's absolutely true.
Yeah,
I will totally. Yeah. I can feel my guilt identifying with that. I'm not necessarily a great care recipient or very patient, but I want to go back to something you said, care partnership. I've been thinking lately, we have a tendency to sort of dehumanize people or objectify them when they begin to need care. For one thing, we already call them something different. It's not a person, it's a patient.
Mm-hmm. Particularly in the healthcare space, it's a patient for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And in end of life, we do try to recognize that humanity, but it is difficult because we're constantly focusing on symptom management and psychosocial needs and spiritual needs. But one of the things that is sort of stuck in my head lately is we talk about placing people. It's a placement. You don't place people. You help them find a better living situation, but you don't place them. It's not a cup that you put into the cabinet.
Yeah, they're not chess pieces. I mean, similarly to that terminology, like I personally don't love the word facility. Like, Who wants to live in a facility? This is, a community or a home. Like, this was my mom's apartment. This was not a facility. This was her dwelling, her, all of her favorite things all around her, for sure. Exactly.
And for hospice people that are going in and out of, it's so hard not to say facility, going into.
I mean, it's my preference. I mean, I'm sure in a healthcare world, it is called a facility.
Sure.
I'm just saying, when you're having those conversations with your family members, like, don't use that word. Like Nobody, that's like a prison. Like nobody wants that.
Exactly. And what we have to remember, the people who go in to provide care in those whatever form of residence our patient lives in, is that is their resident. You go to the residence, you go to that door and you knock and you treat that like their home. It may be smaller than they were used to. They may have a roommate, but it's still their home. And I think it's important. Yes. Again, it all goes back to don't dehumanize people.
Yeah. I mean, even toward the end, like my mom, we tried to kind of keep her, she was bedridden for the last 2 years and on hospice that entire time with my sister. But, forever the homemaker and the host, like, she wanted, even in the bed, to be able to host people.
Sure.
So, we would have like snacks and stuff that she would be able to offer people, like in her baskets and things, to try to, again, give her that role and that purpose and humanize that for her.
Right. It was part of her identity to play the hostess.
Yeah.
I love it.
For sure.
This episode is sponsored by Hospice Navigation Services, the guide for your journey. Navigating end-of-life care can be confusing and overwhelming. Hospice Navigation Services can help you navigate hospice care for the best end-of-life experience possible. Hospice navigators are hospice professionals trained to provide accurate, unbiased information. Our team's compassion and respect for quality of life allows them to help you focus on getting the kind of care you want. When you need in-depth information about hospice, a Level 1 navigation session can provide information on what hospice care includes, roles of the team members, and how to choose a hospice agency. A Level 2 session is the best choice if you want to include multiple members of your family or caregiving village, and includes an explanation of hospice costs and coverage. If you have specific questions about a current hospice experience, a question and answer session with a hospice navigator can give you the answers you need. Watch for the launch of the Hospice Navigation Services on theheartofhospice.com. Hospice Navigation Services, the guide for your journey. Now back to the conversation.
So can we talk about your experience with hospice with your mom?
Yeah. What do you want to know? My life is an open book. It didn't always start that way, but after 8 years of doing this, yes. Yeah, for sure. I had a hospice with my dad, was 1 week long. So, I've had different experiences. So hospice with dad was the last week of his life. And he was in a hospice community, whatever you want to call that, building,
mm-hmm.
A hospice house. My mother-in-law also had hospice, home hospice. My mom had home hospice. And then I've seen a hospice with my aunt not that far back in a hospital setting. So I feel like I've gotten some different flavors of it, but definitely the one that has the most experience in our family has been with my mom, because it was a 2-year length, which is a long time. I think that's a myth for many people, is that they think they can't be on hospice for that length of time. And while she did get reevaluated all the time, as needed on that cadence, the services that we got with my mom were not only wonderful for her, but also were a huge relief for my sister. So, Hospice of Michigan was the name of it. And they came to rural Hubbard Lake, Michigan. There is no stoplight. There is nothing. Like the closest town where you go to, like a Walmart, is, probably 15, 20 minutes away. So those ladies were amazing. My mom was a large woman, so she had to have 2 hospice care workers come and bathe her 3 times a week, which was a huge, huge help to my sister. Having the stuff come to deliver the supplies to my sister and the medications saved my sister so much time. I mean, think about that. She's 15 minutes away from where she's going to get these things. So having them delivered to the home and having them paid for was, and not having to take my mom to and from, that was a huge time saver for her, for sure. And then just like the people to talk to, like Susie, my sister, was super isolated. Had a beautiful place. My mom had a beautiful view of the lake, the little Hubbard Lake, but was very isolated. So these people became her friends. In fact, they ended up doing, in Michigan, they have a 10-cent refund on the aluminum cans. So to raise money for Hospice of Michigan, my sister became like a collection point for cans. And they made a lot of money back to hospice. That was, I think, after my mom passed away or close to it. But it's pretty amazing. Amazing relationship. I can't say enough nice things.
That's awesome. Not everybody has a great experience with end-of-life care with a hospice team, so it's wonderful. So any hospice professionals, if you're listening, you're getting it right. Keep going. We need you out there. So Elizabeth, how have you found ways to create meaning after losing your mom?
Well, I think with Happy, Healthy Caregiver, right? Like it's a way for me to kind of reflect and look back and during the process, writing was very therapeutic for me, but now even the learnings are kind of still happen all the time, and able to kind of take these experiences and share these stories in group settings. So I do a lot of speaking to employers and, caregiver luncheons and things like that. So this is a way that I feel like I'm helping the person that's like sitting in the room that was me back in 2014, like feeling isolated, feeling overwhelmed and completely lost, and hopefully like fast tracking them to some of the resources and support that they need. And then one of the things I'm super grateful for all the caregiving connections and the meetings there. And then as far as like my mom's stuff, like I do have a lot of things that were very similar, like the writing and the reading. And I used to always wonder like how she would think about me, like talking about her doing. She was super proud of it. She was very grateful that we were able to kind of take this messy life situation and put something positive in place. And so I think even just talking about them keeps their spirit and their memory and everything alive there. So yeah. And then when I really miss her, I just like go take the perfume that's on my dresser and pull off the cap and give her a little sniff. And I feel like she's like right there. I look at her picture, we talk. So she's everywhere.
That's awesome. I love the legacy that your mom is leaving through you, through the work that you're doing with Happy Healthy Caregiver. That's wonderful. Okay, so you said something that strikes me. You said, of course, you speak to caregiver groups, right? That's a given. That's what you do. You're a caregiving consultant. However, you said you speak to employers.
Yes.
You speak to employers. So why are you talking to employers about caregiving?
Well, for one, I was a working family caregiver, right? So I've been in those shoes before of like what that did to my career. And I really want to give working caregivers the tools so that they don't feel like the only answer when a caregiving crisis happens is, oh my gosh, I got to quit my job and I got to go and take care of somebody. That, to me, that should be the last resort. If you're in a situation where you need the finances to take care of your own home and your own family, and for our future retirement down the road, like it's not getting less expensive to live and we're living longer and longer. We're going to need that money for ourselves, for our long-term care, for sure. And a lot of people don't know too that like Medicare doesn't pay for long-term care. It pays for hospice care in many situations, but that's, not everybody's in a hospice situation. But I feel like employers are starting to get it. I think COVID, that was one of the silver linings of COVID, is that there were more and more caregivers happening, right? So the absenteeism goes up. People are leaving, the Great Resignation happened. People are leaving the workforce. And we've got to figure out that they're finally learning that life happens even within the workday that doesn't have to do with work. And so what if we give these people the tools that help them create a sustainable caregiving life so that they can continue to work? Because I do believe you can be a great employee and still be a great caregiver too, and be happy and healthy yourself. Like it's possible. It takes intention and commitment and a lot of strategies that need to be put in place. So I'm grateful to the employers that are getting it. Yeah. And a lot of they have ERGs, even employee resource groups and affinity groups for caregivers. And if they don't have that, they usually have one for women. And of course, we know that women are predominantly 60 or so % of caregivers are female.
Yeah. The workforce of caregiving, the caregiver workforce.
Yes. These invisible army of caregivers. Yes.
Overpoweringly female. So as a seasoned caregiver yourself, if you could give only 3 pieces of advice, because I know like a million different things that you can share. If you could only give 3 pieces of advice to a caregiver who was just getting started, what would you say? And then what would you say to a seasoned caregiver who is several years into doing the caregiving job?
Yeah. I mean, for the new person, or even for a seasoned person, if they haven't already done this, one of the main mistakes I see family caregivers make is that they wait too long to connect to support. So whether you're, working with a care coach or connecting to a support group of caregivers or an ERG at your employer's office or whatever, find the people who are going to understand what you're going through, and having that even at a local level is ideal, because then you're going to get the exact resources, because things are named differently, called differently, and have different availability in every community. So if you're connecting with like-minded people, they're going to get your situation. They're going to have complete grace without the judgment and the guilt, and they're going to be able to fast track you to those resources that are going to help. And just don't wait for the crisis to happen. And as a caregiver listening out there, potentially, like, maybe you feel like you don't need it, but somebody needs you. And as a caregiver, that might speak to you as like, oh, I can help more people. So that would be my first thing is to do that. And then, we talked about the care partnership, but I think sometimes, like, realizing that, in the beginning, I tried so hard to hold on to those reins and control everything. And then I realized, like, that life got a lot more easier to deal with when I, like, loosened up and let go of the control and started asking my mom questions about, what did she want to be true? How did she want to be remembered? How does she like to live her day? What are her preferences? And just started asking her questions and listening and figuring out how we could kind of meet in the middle a little bit better was essential. And people think that they don't have time for self-care. And so I think this is, no matter where you are in your caregiving journey there, it's not about finding time. Like, we're never going to find the time. We have to create it and be intentional about infusing it, because we have to kind of think, I don't love the oxygen mask analogy. Maybe that speaks to some people, but again, that goes into like, oh my gosh, the sky is falling. We're getting ready to crash. Like, we're in a crisis situation. Right. The analogy that really worked for me was feeding a nest of hungry birds. Like, that's what I felt like, this bird, like, flying and like, oh my gosh, I got so many worms I got to get for these different things that are screaming. My job, my husband needs love. My kids need attention. My mom, and my job, everything. But then realizing, like, oh my gosh, if I don't stop for a second and catch my breath and feed myself some of this nourishment, I'm not going to be able to sustain this pace. And so that was kind of the analogy, and that might help somebody out there. But it's like, you are the hub of the wheel. And if you don't start kind of like putting some nurturing into yourself, and I'm not just talking about like eating right and exercise. Like, that's the other thing, like, people's self-care. It's like, a lot of it is soul care, right? And it's how do you nurture your spirit? How do you process your emotions? How do you do your paperwork, so that you can sleep at night and have peace of mind? My self-care filter is anything that makes me feel energized and makes me feel like I have peace of mind. Then rinse and repeat that stuff. And we all have to have that, or the whole thing crumbles. And this whole army of care workers, we're just going to need care at some point. Like, it's not going to help anything.
Right. I love what you said about soul care. Soul care is self-care. And whether it looks like you sitting in a building where there are other people that believe the same thing that you do, whatever your personal rituals are for spirit care. I love that. Soul care is self-care. That's a good lesson to learn for any caregiver.
Yes. I work with a Brutally Beautiful foundation. It does like respite retreats for caregivers. And Heather Zocali is amazing. She talks a lot about soul care. So that has definitely rubbed off on me. And how I infuse that, I mean, I still, even not in a caregiver, I practice what I preach. Like, getting outside is definitely part of my soul care. Like, I have to get outside every day, and, whether it's walking the dogs or just sitting outside journaling when the weather gets nicer, things like that, that really fills my cup.
And simple things to do. It doesn't cost you any money.
Nope.
But you do have to be intentional to devote that time to it.
I've seen what happens when you don't. Like, I've seen what happens. I've had 3 really clear examples with both of my parents. All of their health issues were caused by the lifestyle choices that they made. Same with my mother-in-law. Like, they would not have been in these situations had they made different decisions. And maybe they would have gotten something else. We don't know that. But everything that they had diagnosed was from lifestyle. So I know I can control that.
Right. So proactive self-care. Awesome advice.
Yes. I heard a new term. Have you heard this term, Helen? Welderly?
Welderly?
Older adults. Yes. I'm going through the process of becoming a certified senior advisor. And the instructor said welderly. And I was like, that's what I want to be. I want to be welderly.
I think I may be working on the process of being welderly.
Well, good, because we need examples of this. Like, I don't have this in my family of looking around. Like, there's not a whole lot of people in my family tree who have gotten that right.
Right.
So,
well, and an extension of that in hospice is quality of life. So wellness and health, that level, however you can achieve that. I mean, I guess you've got genetic issues, right? That you can't do anything about. You can just manage them as much as possible. But then the wellness that you can promote for yourself just through good choices and healthy habits, you can be proactive with that. That's what I would like to do. That's what I would like to do. Absolutely. Okay, Elizabeth, happy, healthy caregiver and the podcast. Tell me about the work that you're doing as a caregiving consultant. How can my listeners find your work and utilize the services you offer?
Thanks for asking. Happy Healthy Caregiver, happyhealthycaregiver.com. You can go there. You'll find the podcast, which has over 150 episodes. My podcast features caregivers sharing caregiving and self-care tips because I believe the family caregivers are the experts in family caregiving. And of course, I'd love to connect with you on social, do a great newsletter every Tuesday called the Weekly Roundup, where I push out what has struck me in the caregiving space and different resources for folks. If people want a complimentary coaching session, that is something that I offer to kind of talk one-on-one on Zoom about their situation and hopefully fast track them to different things. If they want to continue to do coaching with me, that is something that I offer. I don't do a lot of it because it's not scalable. So I do mostly the public speaking and then working with partnerships to help get more resources to family caregivers. That's how I monetize my business. If people are wondering, like, how does she make a living doing this? That took some years to figure out, by the way, but that's what feels good to me is not charging family caregivers. And that's where, like, I'd love to work with more employers. I'd love to work with more companies that are doing things to help family caregivers and help, make people's lives a little bit easier. But yeah, check out happyhealthycaregiver.com or search for Happy Healthy Caregiver on your favorite podcast network.
Awesome. Elizabeth Miller, you are doing some amazing work. I love the work that you're doing in the caregiving space and the way you've turned your experiences into wisdom that you share so openly. So what last thought would you leave my listeners with when it comes to caregiving?
Give yourself grace, when that G word of guilt, because the guilt's going to happen because we love these people, right? And we want to do well at our job and the other relationships that we have. So guilt is just a normal part of life. But when the guilt starts to bubble up, name it, and then give yourself grace, just knowing that you're doing the best job that you can.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you all.
Elizabeth had a lot of good things to say. I learned from her. I like the analogy about the birds. I think that was very smart about being proactive in your self-care so that you can create sustainable caregiving for the person you're taking care of. She and her siblings learned to do that. There's a lot to be learned from Elizabeth's experiences. So I hope you enjoyed the interview, and I would encourage you to connect with Elizabeth. Go to her website, happyhealthycaregiver.com. She offers individual caregiver coaching services for the family caregiver, and she also has business coaching services for professionals who want to better understand family caregivers. She offers an initial 30-minute complimentary coaching session so you can get an idea of what it's like to work with her and what her services are. Elizabeth is also available to speak to your group or organization. She speaks to caregiving organizations, but she also talks to organizations and employers about how to better support employees for your organization or company who might be caregiving at home. So there are a lot of good services there and resources available to you through Elizabeth. So check out her website at happyhealthycaregiver.com. There's a page there that you can connect with Elizabeth and send her a message so that you can find out how you can partner with her. Be sure to catch the next episode of the Heart of Hospice podcast. You can find more episodes on theheartofhospice.com, and don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. You can connect with the Heart of Hospice on Facebook and Instagram, and send me your questions or comments by email to helen@theheartofhospice.com. And remember, no matter who you are or where you are in your hospice journey, you are the heart of hospice.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time.